Welcome back. This is the Right Questions Podcast, episode 12. I am Todd Parker. And as always, I'm here with my co host, Bridget Sampson. And Bridget, what's going on today? How are you?
I'm great, and I'm really excited to meet and chat with Connor today. We are very passionate about a lot of the same things. So I'll leave it to you, Todd, to introduce him, but I'm just very, very happy. And thank you, Connor, for being with us.
Yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to get right to it. We're here today as we always do, try to offer something of great value to you, our listener, and something that you can not just chew on and think about, a question to hopefully enhance your life, but also some challenges and some maybe exercises for you to try to put into practice the things that we're talking about, and specifically the ideas we're offering you today. So on the podcast today, we have Mr. Connor Swenson. Yeah, I'm just going to give a round of applause for Connor. Yeah,
Yay,
welcome, Connor. How you
Connor.
doing,
Thank
Connor?
Hey,
you.
yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. No, we can't thank you enough for making time for us. Connor and Connor's coming to us straight out of London, right? You're representing London today. We're
I
on the
am.
west coast of California, so of the United States. So we're spread apart. How are things out there, Connor? Because we're finally getting some rain here.
It is a very London day today. Bit gray, bit rainy as it's been. We've had a little bit of sunshine the last few weeks to tease us into the spring. But yeah, things are overall okay, trending towards the positive, I think, this time of the year.
Nice, fantastic. Well, little background on how Connor and I know each other. We bumped into each other down in Brazil. I actually had the pleasure of learning so much from Connor at an offsite retreat that we were both, co-facilitating. And in fact, Connor, I still use some of the things that you taught me today. I use some of the breathing techniques. I share them with others. But we'll get to all that. It was a great time, and so it was weird. Like I guess, Sarah, you think things run through your mind. And I was thinking, gosh, what was one of the last things that I did? We call them the before times. What was one of the last things that happened? And I was spending time with Connor down in Brazil. So I thought it only fitting to catch up. And when we were chatting the other day, we literally said we got to hit pause on this conversation and just bring it on the podcast and have a conversation about it, because Connor is really he's been researching and he's been creating and offering, facilitating courses that really are an intersection between things that we can really benefit from, which is the intersection of mindfulness and productivity. So I'm going to give you the question for the day, and then I'm going to set up who Connor is so that he can break down where this is all coming from. So the question today is, how can I, or how can specifically you, how can we practice mindful productivity? But I want to break this down for you. So what is mindful productivity, and how can we work towards it? How can we practice it? How can we embody it? And how can we experience all the benefits of mindful productivity in our lives? So here's where Connor's coming from. All right. He started off, back in the day at this company, you may know of them, called Google. And he was doing great things as a community leader in this organization, and really came from the ground up. He rose through partnerships and marketing, went through to become a global marketing manager for Google, as well. I shouldn't say global. I'm sorry. I messed that up, Connor. It was EMEA. Can you tell us, what does EMEA stand for?
I know, but for those with not as many acronyms as they use at Google, that stands for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Google divides the world, like many big companies, into three neat boxes of the Americas, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and then APAC. So it's just a real cohesive unit of countries, very similar, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, but that's how how corporations do it. Just put it all into one. But I had a great experience. Very, very, very fond memories of that time.
Yeah, and so I wanted to make sure I got that right. So, in coming up through this company, which is a company that certainly is innovative, certainly productive, but certainly has to balance these very different but interconnected and intimately intertwined worlds. I'm imagining that Connor, that you were kind of experiencing this world. You became a search inside yourself certified instructor, which is this amazing program that Google offers, and you've been since gone out on your own and created this as an entrepreneur and been offering not just this make time course, but now ideas around productivity, around mindfulness, around self-care, around self-development. And we're really interested now to hear, how did this journey of being with one of like the biggest companies in the world with all these focus, how did that transition you now to where we find ourselves today, trying to answer this question about mindfulness and productivity? Break it down for us, Connor.
Yeah, well, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. And the journey, it's like looking back, I can connect some dots, but going through the process, as many of us know, it's never so linear or neat in actuality. But yeah, I started with Google in New York and transitioned to San Francisco, then London. And it kind of started a few years into my journey at Google. Like I think everyone else that lands at that company, it's filled with overachieving, ambitious, very passionate, well-meaning people. And I think the tendency when you find yourself surrounded by people like that is just to really push yourself, right? And there's a healthy aspect to that. So when I joined Google, I was constantly trying to push myself to improve and to grow. And part of that, I think I just fell into this pattern of reacting and saying yes to pretty much everything that came my way. I think this can be a default that a lot of us take in especially in larger organizations, but often in life too, is that people ask things of us and there's lots of requests coming in, lots of emails, lots of meetings. And at first, I think it worked out quite well, right? I was feeling like I was making an impact and I was, pleasing people and keeping people happy. But after some time, I realized I just became extremely busy. I was just running around a million directions at once, not really pushing forward on the things that mattered most to me. And then behind that, there was this lurking sense of just fatigue and exhaustion that was setting in. I think anyone who works at a company where the internet is involved, which I hesitate is about, every business today, probably feels that same push, right? It's like you just are constantly dealing with so much input, and Google's the same. And Google was growing rapidly. When I joined, it was 50,000. And when I left, it was 100,000. It's almost unimaginable. And so I just started to question if the way I was working was really sustainable, and starting to slow down a little bit and to ask myself, what would it look like to approach work in a different way where I'm not running around like chicken with its head cut off and working longer nights, extra weekends, because I just found that was draining my brain power. And that's kind of where this journey to what I bring now, we call mindful productivity, sort of began, was just trying to figure out on a personal level, how could I sustain this? And we can get into it in a second here, but I think two of the big pieces are, one is rethinking the definition of productivity. I think that's a lot of what I help people to think about, is moving away from getting super efficient and optimizing and getting as much done, but slowing down, being more effective rather than efficient, and doing more of the right things rather than just more things, full stop. And then mindfulness really helped me. It helped me to get more aligned with what was important and valuable to me, helped me to increase, focus, concentration, helps as well to manage some stress and resilience. And I found that these two things were really important in different parts of my life. And by sort of combining them, I started to find a way that I could, work and feel productive and like I was contributing. I think that's important, but also not doing so at a deficit to my own mental, emotional, and physical health. So that's kind of how it all came to be. And I started teaching this within Google. And as you mentioned, have left Google just over a year ago to bring this to organizations around the world. I think it's a huge problem we're facing, and I'm happy to be trying to offer some ideas on how we can solve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, it strikes me you just hit on it, and maybe you could unpack a little bit more of that for us, that problem, because I see it twofold, right? There's certainly an organizational element that would speak to, you know, money and profits, right? Profitability. Um,
Mhm.
and there's this human part of it, right? There's the people who are part of the organization and the problem they face as well. And so, you know, in doing my own research about this topic, I was struck by this idea that, you know, productivity is often, when we research it, it's just focused on money. It's like, oh, well, we're losing, I think I saw the stat, like, you know, $1 trillion a year because of depression and stress on, right? And so that's very important from an organizational standpoint. So anyone listening saying, oh my gosh, you know, we're not being that productive, this is super important to bring in, right? And but there's another aspect. And I think, Connor, that's the part that you're really focused on, which is the personal, the human aspect of it for the person and how they can manage themselves within it. So if you could, like, could you break down the problem a little bit more for us of what you see the person in the organization facing, like day to day, week to week?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a staggering statistic you mentioned as well. And I think those types of statistics are helpful because they're waking up organizations to the economic benefit, and that I think is a huge motivator to recognize that, yeah, wearing people down has a real bottom line cost, but it's also just bad HR to
Right.
run people like that. So I think the problem is complex. I think one is that it's hard to measure output in the same way it was 50 or 100 years ago. So productivity, in a traditional sense, it's very much measured as units in, units out. And in today's world, what we're responsible for is often much harder to measure, and therefore it becomes difficult for an employee in an organization to kind of show their value. And so the default then is to doing lots of things to look really busy. And so I think this is one shift, right? Is like organizations now are really needing creativity, innovation, people that can work across disciplines and bring, yeah, unique approaches to challenges, right? So that's kind of
Yeah.
that's I think one piece that's dragging people down. Two is the technology. I'm pro technology, right? I grew up my career within Google. I've been absolutely loving the global connectivity that technology has provided, especially in this last year. But it's really started to sever any sort of separation that people have between how their work looks and how their life looks, right? So that has been, I think, a huge shift as people start taking their work home on their smartphones. But then last year that was accelerated because, yes, we're all working from home. Welcome to my spare bedroom/office. So that's causing a huge issue for people as well. Is that the you used to be able to leave work at home, and so your well-being, your social life, your ability to kind of disconnect um, wasn't so difficult to maintain, perhaps because you had a little bit more natural separation. And then I think the third trend that's causing this problem is harder to kind of pinpoint and give a soundbite on, but it has to do with this, and maybe you know this term, this VUCA world. This is kind of talked about a little bit in the worlds of mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and VUCA came from the military, and it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this was used to describe the conditions where conflict can break out. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
volatile, is the world's volatile? Is it changing quickly? Yes. Are things uncertain? More than they've ever been, right? We're uncertain about our careers. We go back to work and we see our family. Are things complex? Yes, because many things are happening. Automation is happening. Jobs are harder to define. And is success ambiguous? Yes. And so this is actually causing, on a deeper human level, a lot of chronic stress, which is really, I think, challenging for people in their work lives, because there's so much that they're dealing with on a human, an emotional, and a psychological level, that the performance or productivity, those types of things, are all hindered because these forces are at play. So there's kind of a lot going on when you look at it. It's just, it's kind of this natural shift in how the economy is moving. It has to do with technology. It has to do with just the uncertainty and the complexity of the 21st century, and probably other things that I'm missing here. But those are some of the main factors, I think, that are causing this problem. And I think I don't have to really, listeners are going to know, like, everyone here, everyone I talk to has some experience of fatigue and exhaustion, maybe so far to where it's burnout or a collapse of some sort. Depression in the UK, it's doubled year on year from last year to this year, 1 in 5 adults. There's a lot of these kind of symptoms that are coming around that are showing you there's some deep underlying challenges that we're facing at work and at life. Yeah. Oh, it's a lot. I know. It's heavy stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think our listeners will definitely be able to relate. And it's, Connor gave us some amazing articles. We can link them in the show notes, but, the statistics and the themes of the level of burnout that people are feeling and the challenges that people are facing, it's just, we're all in this together, and I hope people feel a sense of that. And people like Todd and you and myself as trainers, as entrepreneurs in the world, we're trying to figure out how to support people, how to best support people. And that's where my question comes in. If I can jump in and ask a question, because in the reading that you gave us, which I got a lot out of, Connor, thank you so much. There seemed to be, I'm kind of moving into the solution, Todd. Is that okay?
Yeah, get
like
it.
You're great with the structure. I'm often like,
but yeah, they're like, oh my God.
What do we do?
We get it. We get it. Like, yes,
we're all here. Yeah, we're all here and can so relate. So like moving into the solutions, there seem to be these two themes of what orgs need to do, organizations, and that's our world. It's like Todd and I are doing so much virtual training and professional development. And because of the stress level we feel, even though you can feel it virtually, even though we can't be with people in person. We're now doing things we've never done before, like incorporating breathing exercises in all of the training we do. As Todd said, one of the last clients said, you've got to incorporate play. So we sent out modeling clay kits to everybody so that they could play and create while we were doing virtual training. We're loving, being put in this position to be more creative. So, there's this absolutely responsibility of organizations to provide support, to provide psychological safety, to provide resources. I was reading in your articles about, one of the biggest things that people want is for their manager to be empathetic. But then my question is like, okay, but how much training are these managers getting? We're coaching a lot of managers who are saying, I'm not a therapist. I don't know how to help people through crisis. I want to, but people are in trauma right now. How do our managers, have the skills? Are they getting from their organizations the skills to support their teams? So there's this whole organizational level of how do we provide support? And then there's the question, how much is the individual's responsibility, right? There's sometimes, I'm coaching people and like, okay, let's talk about, are you meditating? Are you exercising? Are you eating healthy? Are you, but then sometimes those folks want to say, I'm trying to do these things, but I'm not getting enough support from my org. So I guess all that is to ask you, Connor, how do we look to our organizations to support their people? And how much do we expect of individuals to practice self-care and take care of themselves so they don't get burned out?
Yeah, I know it's a big question. And the answer is it has to be happening simultaneously at both ends. I think there's a big conversation happening around in the world of psychology, and also in organizational psych and in organizational behavior of like, how much of this is a problem with the culture of organizations and capitalism and these types of things, these systemic things, and how much of it is a personal problem. And I think the answer is a little bit of both. So I think on an organizational level, there has to be some reckoning when you start to see that certain indicators of employee wellness are are really sagging, right? And so that I work with companies, like one of the programs that was mentioned in the intro called Search Inside Yourself. That's a program that really teaches the skills of emotional intelligence with a really mindfulness based curriculum. And last year, the institute that kind of manages that program and certifies teachers like myself released a new program called Adaptive Resilience. And we've been bringing that to organizations as a way to start having that conversation about, okay, what does it look like as a manager to create psychological safety, to practice empathy, to take care of yourself and your team. And like, I think managers and leaders are in need of this more than ever. And it can be that cascading waterfall effect where if a manager is suffering and their well-being and their performance is off, like that just cascades to everybody else. And at the same time, I think we can all do something individually, right? There's this classic kind of like the circles of control, right? What can I control? What do I think I can control, and what's outside of my control? And I'm a big believer that there are things, especially in our internal, in our mindset, in the way that we approach problems, in the way that we can kind of start to cultivate more inner resilience. That work has to be done alone. And so when it comes, it doesn't mean that you can't practice, resilience and meditation and mindfulness and other things in community, but ultimately those inner tools where you're going to build more stability, where you're going to build more grounding, where you're going to actually come to terms and face some of those difficult emotions, those are done sat down with your eyes closed or with a pen and a piece of paper by yourself. And you can cultivate a lot of inner strength and resilience that even though, the storm is blowing high in your organization and it's very wavy, you can still find within yourself that sense of grounding and stability. So I work primarily, my business is with organizations and with teams. But when I do one-to-one things, I'm often, people say, I want my team to change. I want this to change. And we all want everything else to change, but we don't really want to change ourselves, right? That's like, that's an old adage. So I think when we start with ourselves and we cultivate these things internally, people start to notice, right? These also have these other benefits. They start to feel that. And I really believe that everybody is a leader. You don't need to be a manager or director. You don't need to have a title. Your leadership is influence of others. And so if you're showing up to work and you're doing the work by yourself, if you're taking care, if you're exercising, if you're eating well, if you're practicing some form of gratitude or spirituality, that is going to influence others and you'll lead. So it is tough. And I think we have to call out that there are enormous systemic forces at play. And I'm from the US, from Minnesota originally, and a lot of these were brought to light last year in the BLM movement. We're having a huge reckoning here in the UK over women's safety, and there's a lot of systemic factors that make it easier for some to practice these things by themselves and to have those support things, and much more difficult for others to access them. And so I think that's an area that I think the well-being, let's call it the industry, really is needing to point towards, to make sure that this is accessible and available to everybody in all situations. That's a lot. I don't know if I even answered the question.
No,
but
great. Absolutely.
You actually, so in hearing you talk about that reckoning just now as well, it strikes me that there's mindfulness as a practice, right? To separate it from just productivity for a moment, but mindfulness as a practice of self-inquiry, of seeing your thoughts, of being able to not only slow down but be more intentional and less reactive, would also be a central component of that reckoning, right? Of an awareness of self in the world and positionality, so that you might, practice more compassion, more empathy, be more intentional in the way that you interact with others, the way you lead, as you were just talking about, lead people from other regions, from diverse backgrounds, right? Things of that nature. So I guess what I'm driving at is that there's the self-awareness part to all of that. It starts with that self-awareness, and mindfulness can be a core, and I would recommend as a core component, of that. I have a question for you, Connor.
Yeah.
So I was in reading. I mean, I love mindfulness. I know Bridget does. We've had workshops on mindfulness. My father, teaches mindfulness, right, and things of this nature. And I know you and I, Connor, have talked about it. So, but I wanted to quote this article. It's actually a Forbes article, but I want you to kind of, if you could, speak to this, because we highlighted the problem, right, and you highlighted a good part of what the benefits are. So I just want to kind of compartmentalize it. I should say crystallize it for the listeners with this quote, right? Increased meditation practices and research in the last decade show that mindfulness practices contribute to well-being at work, lead to happier, healthier, more productive employees, that mindfulness slows the heart rate, brainwave patterns are slowed, that it boosts our immune system, our cardiac functioning, right? And that we live less stressful lives with fewer health problems, improved relationships, and just overall longer lives. In addition to the fact that we have a sharper focus, dampen stress, and it raises our clarity and decision making. I mean, talk about a lot of benefits, right? So if you could then, can you connect mindfulness and productivity as the core idea, that, and paint a picture of what does life look like for me as an executive, right, as an employee, bringing what sounds like a different kind of mindset to my day. Could you break that down?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a great great quote you said. It's like, I don't know if they, when you read you see those commercials in the US for some allergy drug, and then they're like,
Yeah.
side effects may include side effects may include
Yes.
lowered heart rate, increased happiness, better interpersonal relationships, more calm and stability, a longer life, longevity. Sounds
I don't want
good.
that at all.
I'll
Sounds
take
horrible.
that. I'll take that pill. That sounds
Yeah.
good. So yeah, I think, when I think about mindfulness, I think about awareness, right? And that's what it comes down to. Mindfulness is a state of awareness. And it's often this state where we are aware, and also in a way which is curious and open and kind. So we all have this ability to be mindful. We can do it in this moment. And that's separate from meditation, right? I think your listeners know this well. You practice meditation to develop the skill of mindfulness. You can also practice meditation to develop other skills of compassion. You can develop other skills of more introspective awareness. So I often just want to parse those out, because sometimes I think, okay, mindfulness and meditation, we can be mindful in any given moment. Now, when I think about productivity, I'm really thinking about how effective am I? Not how efficient am I? Not how have I optimized how quickly I can respond to all of my emails? Not how much I can get done, but what I need to get done. And a lot of this, I bring people back to this sort of Pareto's principle, often known as sort of the 80-20 rule, which is that 80% of our results usually come from about 20% of our inputs. And this is a really helpful mental model, which we're aware of. People know it on a cognitive level, but we don't often practice it, because we wake up and what do we do? Most of us check the phone, check a couple of emails, right? We do a few things where we jump into the workday without ever giving a pause to think, where is my highest contribution going to be today? Or even, what do I need to do for myself before I open up my phone so that I can be of the highest service, the most effective person? So
Yes.
I think a lot of this productivity stuff, when you read about it, like life hacks, it's all just really like getting you better at just like reacting to the world around you. Mindfulness isn't about reacting. It's more about responding, being able to actually be measured and stable in how you respond to the world. And so when I blend them together, and if you take it in a practical level, I think every day, when you wake up, before you kind of open up the world of sensory inputs, whatever that is, your New York Times, your podcast, your emails, whatever that is, taking 5 minutes to find some practice, maybe some breathing exercises, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's just having a cup of tea or coffee with no distractions, and getting kind of in touch with yourself, I think is so important. We just rush through our days and we just immediately start reacting. So I think that's a really practical way to connect the two. And then I often, when I work with people and I work with teams, we practice what's called the highlight. Now, the highlight is drawn from Make Time, which is a real simple framework for making time for what matters. It's one of the frameworks that I teach. There's a great book written by my friends Jake and John, so you can check that out online, I'm sure. But the highlight is a real mindful approach to being productive. Instead of starting the day with 50 things on your to-do list, you pick one thing. You think, what's one thing above all else that I really want to kind of prioritize, bring my best energy and attention to? This can be a work thing. This might be something you've been putting off, or something that is really urgent and if you don't finish it by 5 o'clock, you're going to feel terrible. Or this can be something else. And then I encourage people to really be proactive in defining when are they going to do that. So mindfulness really helps, because mindfulness helps you develop awareness of your body and your energy. And so as you start to get a sense of like, when am I at my best? Am I like an 8 a.m. till 11 a.m. type of guy or girl? Am I more like a 3 or 4 p.m.? And getting some sense and bodily awareness of the energy, combining it with being effective at prioritizing and saying, okay, what's the one thing, combining those things, that's where you start, where mindful productivity, where kind of like the rubber hits the road. And that's a really it's a really simple ask of people. Choose one thing every day that you protect. The highlight, we say it's 60 to 90 minutes on your calendar. So it's doable for everybody. We're not saying you need 6 hours a day. Most people don't have that. Schedule it in your calendar, protect it, do it at the time when you're most kind of energetic, focused, when you're most alive. And that's how you really start to put some of these things like the 80-20 rule into effect. Because what can happen if you're not being mindful, you just fall into these sort of default autopilot modes, and you start doing something important and your attention gets moved on to emails, and then you've lost the morning. So there's many other tactics about single tasking, about checking in with yourself throughout the day. But I think the two that can really bring them together really concretely for people is find some way in the morning before you let other inputs come in to just check in with yourself, see if there's something in that check-in, which is like, this really feels alive. Like I want to do this today. I need to do this. And then to bring that into the more productivity side is put that time aside, put it on your calendar and protect that. Consider that, that meeting with yourself, that most important thing with yourself. I think a lot of us, we might have put something on our calendar, then a meeting gets scheduled, then we just accept it. But you got to just remember, your most important kind of ally in this journey is yourself, right? At the end of the day, you've got to look and in the reflection and be like, did I really do what I know I needed to do? And so setting those boundaries can be really, really helpful for people. Yeah.
Outstanding suggestions. I couldn't agree more. And I was really struck by everything you just said and the articles that you read. It's all coming together for me in new ways. And we coach people on these concepts a lot, but I think we always need to be deepening our own practices and our own understanding to help others. And one thing, kind of an analogy that came to me that I'm curious about what you think about it is mindful eating. So I do a little bit of weight loss coaching, some of my trainees in weight loss coaching, and we're always talking about, not when people are busy, they'll just eat food. And then after, you don't even remember that you ate it because you just rush through it and then you get back to work, right? But we're talking about the same thing with our work projects. And I don't think I've really made that connection at a very deep level until you shared what you just shared, Connor, that like for me, for instance, I'm doing all these retreats right now. Todd and I lead virtual retreats, and I just did one. And I needed like a whole day to sit down and plan this retreat. It's a really important retreat for this whole leadership team. And it was a half-day retreat. And just as you said, emails came in and other requests for other work came in. And then I was like, oh, sure, I'll reschedule a coaching session on the day that I was supposed to have the whole day to plan this retreat. And so I didn't protect that so that I could mindfully sit down and think about this all important experience that I wanted this leadership team to have in this retreat. And that's mindful productivity. It's about the quality and the focus and the flow that you get into when you're working on that one thing that you've committed to without disruption from the 10,000 things from the, the Tao, there's always the 10,000 things, that are going to come at you. And so, I think we can draw analogies. I think we can look at what is that one project that we didn't allow that to happen in. And what was like for me, I ended up working on that late at night, the night before that retreat. And the retreat still went really well. I pulled it all together, but looking back, I didn't do what you're saying and protect that time that I knew it really was going to take like a good day. And I wanted to be in flow and like think about these people I was going to be working with and their differences. And they had already done like a personality assessment ahead of time. And I wanted to look at their results and think about what that meant for what we're going to talk about. And so I'm just trying to give a kind of a concrete example and an analogy. What do you think about that, Connor? Does that resonate at all for what you teach?
I do that all the time still.
Okay, thank you. I feel better. Thank you.
I sit down, I'm like, great, I'm gonna do this, and I get pulled away. So like a huge people often ask, right, okay, there's one thing that I can start practicing like right away. Like, well, I mean, my biggest the biggest life hack is self-compassion in some sense. Almost the most difficult thing for all of us is to treat ourselves when we have those days with some kindness and some respect. So it's like, you have this day, Bridget, and I just want to tell you, look, it's not a big deal. Like, it happens. Like, you still got it done. Like, you're trying your best. Like, don't worry. Next time, maybe we can like think about ways that we block some of those distractions. But then in my own head, if I do that to myself, by the end of the day, I'm like, I am an idiot. Like, I can't believe I did that. And it's like, we're so easy to just give someone else that comfort and respect. And I think it's important. And I think, when it comes to mindful productivity and self-awareness, part of it is self-awareness is painful at first. Okay. Because sometimes you're unaware of your actions, and then you find yourself with a hand in the cookie jar after lunch, eating the third cookie. This is not a real life example, okay? Maybe you think, wait a second, like I don't want this, right? And like this isn't what I want. And then there's many times going forward where you're eating that sweet, and you're thinking, I don't want this, but it's so delicious. And it's the same thing with work, right? And there's so much, in our inbox, in LinkedIn, on Twitter, there's a lot of dopamine inducing goodies on the web. And part of mindful productivity is first becoming self-aware of our own, our values, what we want, our purpose, and setting goals and things on that. But another step is also, what's my weak spot? And Make Time, the book I mentioned, we call this your kryptonite, or your distraction kryptonite. It's kind of like Superman, right? Powerless in front of kryptonite. It's like, I was the same way with the New York Times last year. It's like any moment, if there's a screen by me, I'm checking the front page to see what's going on in COVID news. And then as you become aware of it and you start to go, this is not the behavior I want, then there's the suggestion of what can I do? And so what I love about this field of, if we can call it that, of mindful productivity, is there's a lot of people playing in this space and figuring out new ideas. And quite a simple one is, I've just, many people have done this with me too, is there's no New York Times app on my phone. And once the app was gone, I was still looking at it on Safari. So I go into Safari and I put New York Times on the blocked website list. So now every time I want to just get a quick little dopamine hit because my brain is feeling like it wants a little distraction, a little something, it's no longer there. And then I have to have that mindful pause where it's like, take a breath. And it's like, okay, I'm supposed to be planning this leadership retreat. What am I feeling? I'm feeling a bit of, I don't know, maybe I'm afraid that this exercise, this new thing is not going to work out. And what's that like? And turning towards that and recognizing, hey, that's okay. That fear is trying to help me prepare well, and you're welcome in this, and then returning to the work. And there's this self-awareness is a painful journey. It's not as calming and as comforting as you see someone sitting on a mat meditating quietly. It's often a
Yes.
many years of kind of all this ugly stuff coming up, and you kind of having to go, here I am eating that cookie again. What am I doing? Like, come on. And over time it changes, right? Over time, those urges, they soften, new behavior patterns emerge. Our brain is incredibly plastic. And with awareness, we can do that. So it's amazing and working on sort of healthy eating. I think mindfulness with regards to eating is just such a powerful practice. A great thing I recommend during the day for people to do. Lunch without any screens, even if you only have 20 minutes. I mean, it can just absolutely change the quality of your day, the energy you come back after the break with, instead of, you know, shoveling down a bowl of pasta while, you know, scrolling through Instagram, which, you know, I've been guilty of doing too.
Well, there's so much wisdom, right, in what the two of you, well, this discussion, you know, the ideas being offered. I heard you talking so much about it, Connor, and then Bridget, you gave it an actual word, and something that I'm always striving towards, and, you know, love it when I achieve it, and, you know, sometimes can be quite distant and fleeting, which is this idea of flow. And, you know, flow in this, this state of flow that, as I said, when you experience it and time sort of stops and just kind of just evaporates into the unknowable, the great unknowable, because you're so immersed and in a positive way, just so in whatever it is you're doing. You've given yourself so to the moment and to the person or to the project or to the meal, right? Or to, I mean, even to the workout, to the hike, right? Yeah. So so then what I hear you saying, Connor, in all of this with the mindful productivity, is knowing yourself so well that you know the ways that you use the word hacks, but you know the different ways to put yourself in a state, to take actions, to put yourself in a state of flow or get as close as possible, so that innovation and creativity and, you know, can rise, and, you know, stress and self-doubt and, you know, all the ruminating thoughts can sort of dissipate, but to know yourself well enough and to have very real practices in place to put yourself there. Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, flow is this elusive, I feel like, fleeting feeling that I think many of us are familiar with, and we chase after. And it's you know, again, I refer back to Make Time, because it's a framework I'm familiar with. We call this idea of getting into laser focus, and it's kind of like it's kind of like flow-esque, right? Where you're just in this kind of absorbed attention state. And what we talk about in laser is the most important thing I think that we can do when it comes to creating the conditions for that, is to create more barriers to all the things that are going to distract us. And this is, I think, where the behavioral science and research is becoming more and more clear, is that habits are formed more so out of environment than out of willpower or intention. Like James Clear has this wonderful quote, which is, we don't rise to the level of our intentions, we fall to the level of our systems. Our systems are like our routines, the way that we set things up. And so a big part of mindful productivity is having that kind of assessment of, like, Todd, like, when do you feel the best, and what gets you pulled off, and then what does it look like to create conditions that are just going to be more conducive. It's not going to mean that you're going to wake up every day and have 2 hours of flow. You're just writing prose and it's beautiful. Work is ugly, right? And I'm loving this.
Yes.
I'm loving this idea. It's called the rule of thirds from Alexi Pappas. She's an Olympic athlete or runner. She has this book called Bravey. I think I have it right behind me here. Look, I think it's stacked underneath me. She's fantastic. Nice. So she's a filmmaker, Olympic athlete, and she was told she was training for the Rio Summer Olympics in 2016, and she was just having like bad days. And her coach, also an Olympian, was like, "No, this is the rule of thirds." And she was like, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, when you're going after a big goal, when you're doing something daring or great, you're meant to feel good a third of the time, okay a third of the time, and pretty crappy a third of the time." And I think that applies to this flow, because I set up my life as best as I can. I try to make sure that I have all these conditions, but sometimes I sit down to write my newsletter or an article and it's ugly. But it's also appreciating that that's all part of the process. Anyone that's doing great things recognizes and becomes okay with that. And I think that's where the mindfulness piece comes in, because instead of being critical and being like, "Oh, I'm not in it, like it's not happening for me today," it's a oh, like let me turn towards this with some curiosity and let me just be open to that, and then let's see what happens. And then at the end of it, the hour is up, the time is done, you've put in what you've put in, and then you move forward, right? And it's about being engaged and present, and then often just letting the past be the past, and you kind of move forward. So I often, I think as someone who I was a little upset when I first heard about flow, and I was trying all the time, and I was like a day a month I felt like I was in that. And then I was like, wait, as I started to realize, look, it's about the conditions and the systems, and making sure you give yourself the best possible outcome, and then recognizing that you're only going to be on fire a third of the time, but you got to be loving the crappy time too, because that's just as important. It's the opposite side of the same coin, right? So yeah, there's a lot there, but
the Olympian, it's, you know, I was thinking of Shaun White. I love snowboarding, right? And you know, if you're gonna go do, and I'm very much into, you know, extreme and action sports, and one of the things that's fascinating about it is an athlete's ability to manage their emotions when they're staring down such, you know, like you've waited for this moment, and to do it, you said it happened, you know, a third, when why we are so in awe, or at least myself I could speak for, but it seems like why we watch the Olympics, why we're so in awe, is that someone could do that once is impressive. That you could show up 4 years later, 4 years, you know, 8 years later, 12, and do it over and over and over again, just speaks to the ability to control, not just discipline yourself in all of these, you know, athletic ways, but to control and discipline your mind in a way that could have you show up and be that present and in that state of flow to, like, say, stomp that half pipe, like, you know, like Shaun White would do, and just in over and over. So yeah, I hear you, Connor. That's so well said. The thirds. I've never heard it put that way.
I love that. I love that. And I really want to touch on one part of that for our listeners, especially because I think that for people like the three of us who do what we do and do a lot of public speaking and training, people have this misconception like, oh, you're just naturally positive and you're always happy. People will say that to me, right? And I think sometimes the opposite. Like, I have very, very dark moments. Todd's been there with me. Like, I don't know if we're going to make it through this. You know, we all as human beings have our dark, dark moments of doubt and fear. And I'm not an extreme sports person, so I'm not going to be the one putting myself at the top of the snowy mountain to, you know, steep. I like the moderate runs and things like that. But life gives us enough of that anyway, doesn't it? Right? We've all had so many challenges, especially in this last year. I just want to acknowledge for everyone listening that what Connor just said about the thirds is such a useful, I think, concept for all of us. And as I'm coaching people and coaching myself, I'm trying to feel out, like, where are you? Do you need, sometimes people need that help and support. Like, I want to get to a more positive place. I want to work with my thoughts, you know, to think differently, to shift my mindset. And sometimes people just need me to sit there with them while they cry. And I'm happy, so happy and so honored to do that when people trust me in holding that kind of space. Right. And so and that's the thirds that you're talking about, is how we need to be there for ourselves and be there for others depends on where we are in those thirds. And also, since we're talking about working productivity, like, see if when you're in that really low third and you're in a dark space, can you just let yourself off the hook? Because I've had days where I had committed, I am going to get this done today. And it just felt like crap for whatever reason, and really looked at what I had committed to that day and saw that, you know what, I can do it tomorrow, or I can do this piece of it. I can manage to do this piece of it, or I can ask for help, or I'm going to reach out to Todd and be like, Todd, can you help me with this today? And Todd's like a rock star. And he's always like, yes, I can do that. You know, rely on each other. We're human. We need each other, and we need to be honest about where we are, I think, is part of what we're talking about. What do you think, Connor?
I got a lot of goosebumps. I'm feeling just like resonance with that. And yeah, I mean, last year I started my business. I left Google on February 28th. Todd and I were very luckily in Sao Paulo 2 weeks before. It was I got to go to the very opening party weekend of Carnival, and there's 5,000 people in a room. And then we came back, and the whole world just went whoop. And I left Google to start this company. And this is what I've been helping people do, right? Is to find that sustainable approach to their lives, right? Take care of themselves, taking care of their work, and last year was just a roller coaster. And especially I got to November, December, they were dark months, literally and figuratively, here in London. Couldn't see anybody. We were in lockdown for 6 weeks. We had to cancel Christmas plans. Like, everything was just, and I had a lot of those days when I was like, it was December 14th, and I was thinking, I pictured in my head how I'm going to finish off the year. I'm going to, everything's going to be done. My invoices, my website's going to be finally updated. I'm just going to, I had done this in previous years. I felt good, and then I'm going to end the year on a high note. There was no high note there. It was just days of just getting through it. And you got to practice that self-compassion and recognize too that we're humans, right? And it's I think that's one of the lessons that I think Google really gave to me, which is, for the most part, I think that's a radical approach to how Google looked at as employees. It's like humans, right? It's not just robots, right? And it takes a lot of different things to fuel us up. And I think last year with the disconnection, the isolation, the fear of health and safety, these things weigh on us in huge ways. And I had many days when I was like, wait, I'm supposed to be able to get into flow. I'm supposed to be able to be on top of things and to stick to the schedule. And it just doesn't happen. And so there's also that kind of letting yourself off the hook, as you put it so nicely, and just recognizing that we're in this marathon, right? We've got to recognize sometimes when we just got to let the foot off the gas. There's this analogy that I often use, especially when I work with startup founders. That's when I worked at Google. I worked a lot with this team called Google for Startups, which is where Todd and I kind of met. And I worked a lot with people growing companies when they're 10, 20, 30 people. And they're just pedal to the metal. And the analogy I always use is look, you are flying down the highway and you have your foot on the gas and your dashboard is blinking. You need to pull over and get some gas.
Yes.
And all you're just totally ignoring that. And I go, what happens in a mile or 5 miles or 10 miles or a kilometer, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers over here? And that's what I think a lot of us are doing too. And that's what I think as that one of the core principles at the heart of mindful productivity is recognizing that you got to pull over and you got to give yourself these breaks, and you really have to balance the doing part of being human and the being part of being a human, which is space and comfort and relaxation and softness and quiet. And it's just, it's hard in our world. We're so obsessed with doing and performing in public and showing everyone what's happening and being our positive best selves. And I think this conversation of just look, we're all struggling, in whether or not we're teaching this, talking about it. The only reason I teach and talk about this is because it helps me on my own journey. There's no mastery on this level, right? I'm sharing, trying to figure this out, testing things, sharing them, learning from people in the process. So there's no one, if anyone's telling you that it's all buttoned up and they're perfect, they're trying to sell you something one way. We're all perfect.
That's it, right? It's so well said. Go ahead, Bridget.
And it's not a good selling technique, because what I love about one of the gifts of COVID, although it's been, of course, heartbreaking and tragic, is being real with each other. We're struggling. We've had so much loss and devastation, and everybody's feeling that need to connect on a real human level. So when you said if they're trying to sell you something, if they're saying they're perfect, they're not even selling it. They're not doing good
Right.
sales job because people want that real human connection now. Todd, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, whether you're a company, right, an organization, or an individual with your own organization, or an individual within an organization, right, that what you just said there, Connor, about screaming down the highway and the lights, the dashboard is flashing. I think of this great, some other people refer to it, I like the phrasing of like this great pause, the great pause that we experienced and that you just described in the last year, that was almost like, some would argue, society itself screaming down the highway and needed to take a pause. And,
Yeah.
really this virus, this pandemic forced it. And when you were talking about, I was thinking of I'm playing Nintendo with my kids again because we got a Nintendo Switch, right? And there's an old video game called Excite Bike where you would drive this motorcycle down the track, and you could go one speed, but you could go faster if you push the other button. And when you push that other button, when you push B, you get a different sound. It's like goes from wall to wall, right? But if you hold B for too long, computer makes you pull over. It just forces it. You're not allowed to go anymore, right? And so to your point, Connor, that I think that's what happened. We were forced, right, to pull over and slow down. And so now we got to ask ourselves, what do we take? What's the lesson? What's the gift? What do we do now with this hopefully heightened awareness of both self and the world around us and how we're operating in it? So is there like, we threw a lot at you today, listener, like, we broke down a significant problem from multiple facets, right? And then Connor provided so much solution and so many solutions and exercises and suggestions and backing, right, for how to put this into practice and what it would look like. So now I'm going to challenge him to just, Connor, if I'm sitting here listening to this and I'm going like, man, that sounds pretty great. It sounds like they do these things, but where do I start? Like, what's the starting point? What would you say to our listeners? Where do they start?
Yeah, there's many many roads all leading to the same destination. So I think if anything, when you're listening to this conversation and you're like, oh, I'm excited about meditation, or I heard Connor mention journaling, or any of these other things, I think follow that excitement. I do think one of the big but simple ideas that I think has just changed how I look at my days and how I organize my life is this idea of a highlight. And I'll just break it down in a bit more tactical terms so people really know how to use it, right? And when I think of the highlight, it's just this one big thing, right, that you're putting at the center of your day. So tonight, if you're listening to this on your after dinner walk, or it's the morning and you're going out for a little stroll, you can just ask yourself, what do I want to be the highlight of my day? And you can pick that with many different strategies. It can be something urgent that needs to get done. It could be something that you really just want to spend time on, something that's going to feel satisfying to have devoted some energy towards. And it could also be something that's going to bring you a lot of joy. So those are kind of three strategies that we recommend, is like joy, satisfaction, and urgency. And I like to say 60 to 90 minutes is this magical window. 60 minutes, because if it's shorter than that, you don't get a chance to get into that mythical flow state, right? If it's just a 10-minute task, it's not going to feel that sense of accomplishment. And there's a real boost that you can get when you finish or you devote the time, and it's a good chunk of time. And less than 90 minutes, because really our energy and attention, the research shows, really plummets for most people after 90 minutes. And in the real world, I don't know many people that have uninterrupted chunks of 3 or 4 hours on their calendar. So 90 minutes is realistic.
Yeah.
And I like to just tell people, choose with your gut when you're thinking about this, and think, okay, what could be the highlight of my day? Should it be a work thing? Maybe it's finishing work at 6 so I can cook a really beautiful dinner for my family. Choosing that as your highlight, it still allows you to structure your day. You're going to finish your day with a bit more gusto, and you're going to be more attentive. And I think it's not just about getting this one thing done. It's also about savoring and enjoying and putting your attention towards what matters most to you. So just like this kind of example of mindful eating, right? Where you're not just eating, but you're enjoying the process. The highlight can be that same thing where you can say, I'm just going to really enjoy this hour and a half that I'm devoting to something that I care about. And it's not going to be the only thing that you have to get done in that day. There's no one in the world that just has one task and they can call it a day. So you still can have your to-do list, but it frees you from the tyranny of the to-do list, which continually adds more things. It's never done. The highlight can give this really nice sense of it's achievable, it's realistic, but when you start doing it day after day and you start devoting that little bit of time, you take this 1% step, right? Continuous improvement every day, just kind of chipping away at something. So you're probably going to pick a highlight, which is way too big to finish in an hour and a half. You're going to say, I'm going to finish the slides for my team meeting. And then the 90 minutes will get up. Don't beat yourself up. This might take a couple of highlights and you're going to right size it over time. It's about the way that you approach it. And I think it's one of the biggest things that I've seen make such an impact on people's lives in 2 or 3 days. Yeah. And it just allows that sense of like, I know what matters to me and I'm spending some time on it. It feels great and you get stuff done and it's just a magical thing. So the highlight, I think, is what I'll leave people and I'll challenge with, if you're listening to this, is pick one, give yourself 60 minutes, put it on your calendar so you know when and where you're going to do it. That's a huge, huge piece of it. We're much more likely to do things if we know when and where we're going to do them. That's right. That's a lot of research on that. And if you don't get it done, if it's a crap day and it just doesn't happen, just don't worry about it. Just let it go. And if you miss 3 days, don't sweat it. Just try it again and just come back to it. It's just like mindfulness is this practice of distracted and then aware, distracted and then attentive. This is the same thing. You miss your good habit, forget about it. Just come back to it. So that's my challenge, is to choose a highlight, do something that's going to give you some satisfaction, some joy, one big thing every day, and take it one day at a time. So yeah, I hope that is a bold enough challenge for your listeners.
It's huge. I love it. And I commit to you, Connor, I'm committing out loud that every day this week, I'm going to pick a highlight. And I also just want to say, I love the name. I love that you call it a highlight. It has such a positive feeling. Like today, my highlight is going to be this. And tomorrow my highlight is going to be this. And I think that, tricks the brain in a way to look forward to it. Right. And I'm sure that's intentional. I'm sure you did that on purpose.
100%. Right? And the real challenge will be only pick one thing a day, because I know every listener's first question is, could I pick 2 highlights? Right. maybe just 3 or 4. So the challenge is try one and give yourself something attainable. So yeah, check out Make Time is the book that talks more about it. It's not my book. Yeah. I don't make any money off the sales of that, so don't worry. This is it's a good recommendation, though, if the idea spurs you on to check that one out.
Yeah, but we do want to know, Connor, how people can find you. I think if I were a listener, I think you're going to say the same thing, Todd. I'd be saying, I want to know how I could bring this guy into my company to teach us more about all of this, or I want to work with him one-on-one, or where do I find him? So tell us, please.
Yeah, I'm easy enough because I'm connorswenson.com. So you can see everything on my site. I send out a weekly newsletter called 1% Wisdom. That's all about this idea, like 1% improvement every day. So I'm not pretending to be a wise person, but it's just interesting idea every week that can help you on this continual path of self-improvement. So you can find my newsletter, and then I'm pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn, and you search my name, you'll find me there, no problem. And so yeah, my site tells you all about the programs I offer and what I do. So if anyone's interested, they can give that a Google and have a look. So yeah, I appreciate you asking.
Yeah. Well, Connor, this was Yeah, just I've really enjoyed this conversation. I know Bridget did as well. The value, as I said at the start, we're always trying to bring as much value as possible and bring people on who can offer a new take on something we're experiencing. Just try to shift our perspective and give us a challenge, to rattle us a little bit, and like you kind of just said, move us 1% just a little bit further, make a little bit of progress, a little bit of growth, which is what we're all about, right? Asking the right questions so we can get there. So, what is mindful productivity, and how can I practice it? How can I embody it? How can I experience its benefits? We certainly, I think we did a great job of answering that question. And Connor, thank you so much for sharing this, with everybody. I encourage all of you listening to really take the challenge to heart, to put it into practice in some way. Follow the feeling, follow the thing, the curiosity that turns you on from anything that we were discussing today. And if you want to, and should certainly want to seek out Connor and his ideas further, be sure to sign up for that newsletter. We are this month are offering a resilience and change webinar that we encourage you to come and be a part of. It's right in keeping with things that we've been discussing here today and that we often bring up on the podcast. We know a lot's changing, as Connor said, and we talked about today. A lot of things are uncertain and will remain uncertain as we navigate returning to work and having some of us still be at home. So with that being said, Connor. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Connor.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you
What a
both.
beautiful conversation. Thank you.
I appreciate you both. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and Bridget, as always, this was a pleasure. Till next time, be good people and make good choices. See you next time. Bye bye.